Hey, Marshall here to tell you about an incredibly easy way anyone who loves brewing and drinking beer can save a little bit of money. In addition to supporting everything we do here at Brewlosophy, the American Homebrewers Association recently introduced their free Brew Guru mobile app. It offers a searchable database of homebrew recipes, including popular craft beer clones and hundreds of award-winning recipes from the National Homebrew Competition. What's more, Brew Guru has a searchable map of deals at breweries, beer bars, and homebrew shops. Grab the free Brew Guru app for iPhone and Android devices today and follow the path to great beer. Without yeast, you can't really make beer. It's the little bugger we all rely on to turn sugary wort into our favorite alcoholic beverage. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and I'm telling you we've got a great episode lined up today. The folks from Imperial Yeast are joining me to chat about the role yeast plays in fermentation. They're even going to address some of our more shocking fermentation-related experiments. It's going to be a good one, knowledge-packed. I'm sure all of the brewing nerds out there are really going to love the stuff we talk about. Speaking of Imperial Yeast, we're going to be collaborating with them as well as Yakima Valley Hops and Mecca Great Estate Malt on what's going to be an crazy rad experience at HomebrewCon 2018. Homebrewers from around the world are going to be hanging out in Portland, Oregon from June 28th to 30th, drinking great beer and learning from some of the smartest people in the industry. Pretty much the entire Brewlosophy crew is going to be there, and I know of a ton of other folks all of you are going to want to sit around and chat and drink beer with who are going to be going as well. This is an event you don't want to miss, trust me. It's like the Disneyland for beer-making adults, and it's only open to members of the American Homebrewers Association. So if you're planning on going, which I hope you do, and you're not a member yet, you can head over to brewlosophy.com/AHA to join today. I was just talking with the dudes from Yakima Valley Hops last week about some new ideas for making the event even more fun. I trust no one is going to be let down. We have contributors all around the United States, and we are always in need of participants. If you'd like to participate in the weird stuff that we're doing, whether that's triangle tests or tasting for the Hop Chronicles or our short and shoddy beers, you can reach out to me, Marshall at brewlosophy.com, and I will put you in touch with the contributor who lives nearest you. We've got representation in Fresno, California. That's yours truly. And we've also got people in Anchorage, Alaska, Corona, California, Pueblo, Colorado, Denver, Colorado, Chicago, Illinois, and temporarily Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, though Malcolm will be heading down to Atlanta, Georgia relatively soon. Like I said, just reach out and I'll put you in touch with whoever you live by so that you can participate. If you have any questions for our Brew & A episodes, you can email them to me, Marshall at brewlosophy.com, or you can drop them on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We've got one of these shows coming up in a couple of episodes, and we're thinking every 10th episode will be a Brew & A, though if you want more, you can let us know, and we will consider that. No specific feedback this week, but I have been getting a ton of questions regarding the Brew Club. It is now a real thing. Whether you're already in a club and just want another community to hang out in, or you don't have a local club nearby, the Brew Club has got you covered. It's totally free. So even if it ends up sucking, it's not like you lost anything. So feel free to join. Members are encouraged to enter short and shoddy beers into competitions under the Brew Club. And I was even thinking, like if someone were to take home a prize with a short and shoddy beer, that we can figure out a way to get them featured on Brewlosophy, whether the website or the podcast. Just try to make it more fun, kind of added bonus. Anyway, you can head over to thebrewclub.com. That's the BRU club.com to learn more and to register as a member. Again, it's free. And it's going to be a lot of fun. They're pushing 200 members at this point. So I know quite a few plan to enter the National Homebrew Competition, which you can no longer register for. So it'll be interesting to see if anyone takes prizes at the NHC. Something I want to let everybody know about. We've got a new newsletter. It's called The Hop Beat. And you can sign up for the newsletter over at brewlosophy.com. If you look in the sidebar from any of our pages, you will see a new sign up form. Just enter your email and you will be added to the list of people who get our newsletter. I think we're planning on releasing a monthly newsletter at this point, just going over all the stuff that we're doing. And of course, any cool things that we've got to offer our fans. So, all right, if you want to help us continue creating this podcast, as well as the experimental stuff we're doing over at brewlosophy.com, you can head to brewlosophy.com/support, where we have links you can bookmark and use to a bunch of great places you're likely already shopping at for gear and ingredients. It's probably the easiest and most innocuous way to support us. That really does help a ton. If you want to be rewarded with something a little more tangible for supporting us, check out our Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, You'll receive never-before-published Brewlosophy recipes, get access to a private Brew Crew forum, and receive unique discounts to Yakima Valley hops. In fact, our $3 level is our new Q&A live cast with somebody extra special. And coming up later this month for the January reward, we're going to be sitting down with Michael Tonsmeyer. That's the author of American Sour Beers and The Mad Fermentationist, where patrons get to ask him anything that they want, and he answers it live for them. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're already working on getting our February guest lined up as well, and we will release more information about that once it's set. So probably like most homebrewers, I'd imagine, when I first got a couple batches under my belt that I thought tasted pretty good, I thought I had some genius ideas for doctoring up my homebrewed beer to make it, even more mind-blowing. And so I had this idea, it was around Halloween 2003, I think, to make a caramel apple ale. And now my idea for the caramel was just to use a bunch of caramel malt. But for the apple, I thought, I'll just toss in a few cans of apple juice concentrate before I pitch the yeast, and I should get plenty of apple flavor that way. Well, it didn't work out terribly good. The beer wasn't great, but I was able to trade it for free cable for a while. I had a buddy who worked for the local cable company who pulled some strings for me. So he got 48 bottles of that horrible beer. But, I recently received a beer from a guy named James Cassiano. Sounds like he had a similar idea. I don't know how long he's been brewing. This batch was an all grain batch, so a little bit different than my extract batch. He says it's an amber ale with 2 jars of apple butter added at flame out. And that he sent me a bottle, said I was the first person other than family and friends to sample any of his beers. So rather than just giving him my feedback on my own, I thought he deserved the feedback from my 2 friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. And this neighborhood is the greatest neighborhood in the entire world.
I have to agree.
I love you.
It's
Oh, this one has a smell. This one has a smell, dude. It smells like a urinal cake. It's gonna be good. I just know it's gonna be delicious. Post pee, like after you pee on it, it just smells like pee. But right now, it smells like urinal cake.
Does it taste like a urinal cake?
You're about to find out. I have an opinion.
It's good.
What do you mean it's good? Come on, man. You gotta do better than that. Okay, am I gonna sound stupid? Does it have kind of a coffee taste?
No. What kind of coffee are you drinking?
Like sour coffee?
It's got the sour to it.
All kinds of milk and stuff poured in there. Like
I've had something similar to that. It's not portery.
Okay, temper this. I don't like this.
I like it better than...
On a scale of no to yes, do you like this beer?
Medium.
God damn it. Do you like it or not?
Yeah, I do.
All right, well, I'm going to take it seriously then. I feel like it's a beer I have to like, but I'm just not a huge fan.
You don't have to like anything.
You can taste certain beers, you're like, this is like somebody put a lot of work into this. I'm supposed to like it.
Sure they did, but...
I'm just not a huge fan of it. I mean, I drink it, of course.
If it tasted like crap, I would say it tasted
There's
like
like 2 beers that we've reviewed that I wouldn't drink. This is not one of those. I'd totally drink this.
Yeah,
I'm just
totally
not a huge fan of it.
They would totally drink it. That's a win in my book. James, good job. My personal opinion about the beer is that it was clean. It was well made. I don't think there were any flaws that I noticed. No diacetyl or DMS or any of the other off flavors. The fermentation was good. And I'm not a big fan of adulterated beers, particularly those with fruit flavors. So I wouldn't say that this was a favorite of mine. But I feel like, I'd never considered using apple butter to impart apple flavor into a drink. So it's something that I might consider doing, maybe to up the apple character of a dry cider in the future or something. I didn't perceive a super strong apple character, but it was definitely there. And it wasn't easily confused with something like acetaldehyde, which people say can have kind of a green apple character. So all in all, man, good job. Thank you so much for sending the beer in for them to review. If you would like to have your beer featured on the 1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get it all set up. You have to have a backbone. These guys are as honest as it gets, which makes it all the more fun. All right, we've got to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got the folks from Imperial Yeast joining me to talk about the role yeast plays in making delicious beer. Stick with us. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling wort, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brulosophy sent you. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. Founded in 1978 by brewing pioneer Charlie Papazian, the American Homebrewers Association is a division of the Brewers Association focused specifically on protecting and promoting the hobby of homebrewing. In addition to their work lobbying for the rights of homebrewers across the country, they're also the primary sponsor of Brulosophy.com. By joining the AHA, not only are you supporting their cause, but you get a ton of benefits as well. Discounts at breweries across the U.S., early access to tickets for events like the Great American Beer Festival, and you get to attend HomebrewCon, the world's biggest gathering of homebrewers. Head over to brulosophy.com/AHA now to sign up to become a member. It's often said that brewers make wort while yeast makes beer. And thanks to folks like Imperial Yeast, brewers these days have access to a wide variety of high-quality options. Thank you guys so much for joining me on the show. Please introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm Owen Lingley. I own Imperial Yeast.
And I'm Jess Caudill. I'm tech support manager at Imperial.
Awesome. And you guys have been around for how long now?
I think we did our first full cook about, 2.5, 3 years ago. I've been working on the company for probably 4.5, something like that.
So what was it that, I find when people kind of create new businesses like this, especially when it's something I love so much, like beer, beer related business, I'm always curious what inspired you to start the new company, and what's your background?
I have a background in economics. I worked at Yeast both as a vendor. I used to sell packaging, so I sold packaging to Yeast, and then I was their customer service manager for 3 years or 4 years there. And then I left that to start a mobile canning company. And, we just kind of, why I started it is we would, after events, me and Jess and other people that worked there, Jason, would kind of sit around and get drunk and be like, it'd be awesome if we did this, or it'd be awesome if we did this. And I didn't think it was going to happen there, so I wanted to go and do it.
I love that. Yeah, I like mostly that, like, after work you'd sit around and get drunk. I think that's most everyone's dream with that's the sign of a good job, right? Jess, what's your story?
I have a background in brewing, and I also have a degree in microbiology. So after finishing up school, I brewed for about 7 years and then worked at Yeast Labs for about 12 and a half.
Wow.
And so just came from a brewing background and then into yeast production.
Yeah, it's not just that you know yeast, it's that you kind of know the production side of yeast, it sounds like, after having been at Yeast for so long.
Yeah, it definitely helps out.
That's awesome. Well, Owen, you mentioned that you were running a mobile canning business, and I think one of the more identifiable things about Imperial Yeast, up until recently, I guess, is the fact that you guys were packaging your yeast in cans.
Yep, that's actually, I knew I wanted to start a yeast company, and so I said, we had some non-compete things to get through, and I said, well, I'll go start a mobile canning company, learn about canning, and then try to take that info over to starting a yeast lab, because I knew I wanted to package my homebrew yeast in cans. Yeah, that company kind of blew up. It's fairly big. I think we'll do like 14 million cans or something this year, and
wow.
We're spread out between a couple states. But the goal has always been to run my own yeast lab. That's what I've been working towards for a long time.
Right,
So.
right. And so you were and you did that. I mean, you're running your own yeast lab now. You guys were packaging in cans, but just very recently, you guys decided to make the switch over to what you're calling your pitch right pouches.
Yeah, we've been working on it for about 8 months or 9 months. We try not to do any knee-jerk reactions, and there's a lot of different variables that can throw wrenches in your plan. So we've been working on the pouches for about 9 months.
Yeah, they look gorgeous. I mean, and it looks like you guys are doing different colors for the different types of yeast strains. And I was talking with Casey, and she was saying that you guys have like instructions on the back of what to expect from each yeast, stuff like that.
Yeah, we wanted to make a switch into a flexible package. If we're gonna take the time to do something, we want to take the time to do it right. So we went back and forth with our designer for a long time. We wanted to have, anytime we do something, we want to kind of set the bar in the industry for everybody else to follow.
Yeah, yeah.
So we decided to color code for ale, Belgian ale, German, all the different yeast strain families. And then we wanted an individual pouch for each strain. So you wouldn't have, that's one of the things I didn't like about the cans is we just had to spray on the date and the strain, and there's not a lot of other information on that.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to read. It's easier to find, if you're looking for an ale, you grab a gold pouch. If you're looking for a German, you grab a green pouch, and you can flip through pretty easy.
Yeah. And
then we wanted to have attenuation, flocculation, temperature range on the actual pouch, so people don't have to go and refer to a website. We wanted to make it easy.
Yeah.
And then we have we wanted to have actual pitch rate information, so people can start to learn why we do 200 billion cells and what that means in million cells per mil per degree Plato on it.
Yeah, right. And we're going to definitely hit on pitch rate and whatnot a little bit more in depth here in a minute. But those pouches look amazing. I love what you guys are doing. I haven't had the opportunity to use any pouches yet, but I'm stoked to get my hands on some. And I'll admit, though, I'm going to miss the cute little cans. I mean, I was a lover of the cans, but I know that I was talking with, I think it was Casey again, and she was telling me that, you got to do what the market's asking for. And then there was these upgrades that you can make, like you were mentioning with the pouches. And I love that you guys kind of listened, you took the feedback from your customers basically, and are putting out there something that now is probably of higher quality, sounds like.
Yeah, it's the same yeast going into the can as the pouch. And long-term viability there's some things that we do to manage that in the actual yeast production process. And the liner of the pouch is the same as the liner inside the can.
Okay.
For us, it's we try to listen to our customers, both on commercial and homebrew. And honestly, it was the only negative thing we ever heard about homebrew was the can. So it was time to listen, time to make a switch. So we decided to put some effort into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm constantly telling people how, to Imperial yeast, homebrewers aren't just the bottom of the rung. I really feel like you do listen, and I thank you for that. That's awesome stuff. I have heard some horror stories from people like popping open a can and having it kind of spray them in the face type of thing. Mm-hmm. But I maybe I'm lucky, but I've never had that happen. And regardless, the pitch right pouch is out now, and I'm stoked to get my hands on it. Well, before we start getting into some of the more, our crazy experiments that we've done that have produced these weird, unexpected findings, I thought maybe what we could do is like a more of a practical overview of yeast's role in making beer. What exactly is fermentation, anyways?
I mean, the basic role of yeast is to take sugars and other nutrients in the wort and convert them into carbon dioxide and, more importantly, ethanol. And at the same time, the yeast is growing because we want yeast to make beer, but yeast wants to grow and reproduce. So that's the main role is to utilize those sugars and produce ethanol and flavors and aromas that we like to smell and taste when we're drinking beer.
Right. Yeast doesn't really care so much about the beer as much as they do surviving, right? And reproducing.
Exactly. If you allowed them their perfect conditions, we'd probably produce beers that weren't the tastiest out there.
I think there's some homebrewers who are doing that, actually.
I've done it sometimes.
So have I. We're all guilty. Well, as all brewers are aware, yeast tend to be very generally categorized into one of two, I guess, kind of main camps, either ale, which is said to perform best kind of around that 68 degree Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius temperature, and lager strains, which does well at cooler temps, something like 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. I was wondering if you guys could kind of touch on, maybe not without, not going too university microbiology classy on us here, but what's the difference between these ale strains and these lager strains? You hear people say they call them like top fermented versus bottom fermented, and these different fermentation temperatures. What really makes them different?
I'd say the genetics behind the strains technically makes them different, but I think what a lot of the difference is how we use them. We're using ale strains at warmer temperatures and utilizing those warmer temps to crank out certain compounds that go well with the hops we use or whatever other ingredients we may be using. Whereas when we're brewing with lager yeast, we're running cold temperatures and trying to keep things clean. And that will have an effect on how the yeast performs and how it rises to the top or doesn't rise and how it settles to the bottom of the tank. So, technically speaking, there's some genetic differences between lager yeast and ale yeast.
And when you look at something like if you break down even just ale yeast, you've got stuff like Flagship, which is the Chico strain, I believe. And then you've got Hefeweizen strains that produce these, Flagship's going to produce that nice clean profile where the malt and the hops get to shine through. And then you've got things like Saison and Hefeweizen strains that produce these other phenols and these esters. That's all just basic genetics of the yeast strain.
Yeah, it's just certain pathways that are accentuated during growth and reproduction. And so and some other differences, like a phenolic strain actually has a gene that helps produce the phenolic off flavors, or actually when we're brewing with them, they're not off flavors, they're flavors we're looking for.
Right. One's flavors, another's off flavor, right? Exactly. Yeah. I find it so fascinating that this single-celled organism, that we've been able to tame it as we have, and isolate specific strains and allow them to make, kind of force them to do this thing for us that we enjoy so much. It's just crazy to consider that. Is there an element of like genetic drift when it comes to ale yeast? So if you were to take a specific strain, let's just say you took Flagship and held on to that for 20 years, and will it ultimately drift towards something new and unique, or will it pretty much stay the same?
I think the chances for genetic mutation in ale strains is there, but it's not very common, and it's not very common to promote that mutation. I think a lot of times when people see drift in a brewery or someplace where they're repitching for years on end or cycles on end, that they're actually getting infections with other strains, maybe actually good strains that they end up wanting to promote.
Right.
But I think to promote a genetic mutation would take a lot of time, and it might have to be on purpose.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of blame that yeast get when for poor brewing practices by brewers, whether home brewer or pro. Blame it on the yeast. I think is the easiest excuse, but who knows?
Yeah, I think it's the hardest one to kind of figure out too. A lot of other ingredients are a little more straightforward, but with something that's living and doing biological processes, it's a little more complicated. Yeah,
definitely. I wonder what your guys' thoughts are on moving to lager yeast. What your thoughts are. I heard this rumor recently that strains like the Weihenstephaner strain, your guys' global, are actually Saccharomyces cerevisiae as opposed to, what is it, Pastorianus or Carlsbergensis. And then somebody chimed in one of the forums that I frequent and said something along the lines that, so is the Pilsner Urquell strain, which is your guys' Urquell. What say ye? I'm really interested in this topic.
Well, we're in the middle of running some fingerprinting analysis on all of our strains. So I'd say if you check back with us in a few weeks, we'll have a little more definitive information on how those strains match up with Pastorianus versus Cerevisiae.
It seems to me that there's I love lager beer. I probably brew more lager. Not probably. I do brew more lager than I do anything else. And we've experimented with lager fermentation temperature, perhaps more than any other single variable so far. It's just something we're fascinated by, and we'll dig into those results here in a bit. But there's some interesting observations that I've made in my experimentation with lager yeast, and in my research, I found that they actually do. Something that I read says that Pastorianus, the kind of the biggest lager strain out there, is actually a hybrid between Cerevisiae and a Eubayanus yeast strain of some sort. Now, I'm not a microbiologist. I don't exactly know what that means, but that it was created by these two coming together.
Yeah, that it's a hybrid of those two strains, whereas the Cerevisiae is not a hybrid.
That's just kind of a straightforward.
Yep.
That's so interesting to me that these two come together. And I guess it wouldn't be terribly shocking then that this hybrid performs similarly, at least, right, as the standard Cerevisiae strain. But then I read about this whole concept of there being like two branches off of the Pastorianus, which is Froberg versus Saaz. It's something that we've talked about in a past episode. Is this something that it doesn't seem like it's a very commonly discussed thing out there right now? But
I think part of the reason it's not a commonly discussed thing is I don't know a lab that it's fingerprinted every one of their strains yet.
Right.
We have a couple hundred strains in the bank, and that grows monthly, if not weekly, at this stage. And there's a lot of misinformation out there on yeast that that's one of the reasons we started this thing up. I know a lot of commercially available yeast strains are the same strain marketed differently.
Really?
Yeah, there's several examples of that. And then, whether that's on purpose or whether it's banking practices from 20 years ago when somebody, went out and said, hey, this is this strain, and it got put into the bank under that name. And that's just, what people have been working off for 20 years.
Right.
So, we're in the middle of sending every commercially available strain out for fingerprinting right now. And that should give us a lot of data that we should be able to share pretty quickly with people.
I'm so excited to see that data. Oh my gosh. That's like tickles the nerd in me so deeply.
Honestly, I think we're going to find some stuff that we're not expecting in there. And then being able to share that and actually start understanding a little more on how the genetics are going to affect what's out there and what you're looking for.
Right.
Should be fairly interesting.
Fairly, goodness gracious, that's going to be mind blowing for me. I love stuff like that. My understanding, the distinction, and I hope I don't mix this up, but the distinction between this Froberg and Saaz variant of Pastorianus is that one of them is more robust. I think that's the Froberg variant, that it's more robust and can ferment lagers anywhere from 46 degrees all the way up to 70 degrees, and it's not going to produce much variation in regardless of that temperature, whereas the Saaz strain's a little bit more sensitive, So I'm really interested to see what you guys come up with, to see if we can't, kind of categorize yeast a little bit better than we're able to nowadays. It seems like the best thing we've got for us to do that is really just perception, right? What we smell and taste in a finished product.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. So we could kind of work these down to specifically what they are genetically, but in the end, brewers are going to pick strains because of what they do to to the finished beer and how they work well for them in their brewery or in their homebrew system.
Right. Totally. Wow, it's going to be great stuff. Before we go to a break, I've something I've always wondered about. You see certain yeast strains marketed as hybrid strains. So we're talking about Pastorianus being a hybrid of these other two things, but I'm talking about yeast like Kaiser and Dieter, which are used for styles like Kolsch and alt beer. What exactly is a hybrid strain?
I'd say they're using the terminology hybrid just to describe how it's an ale strain, but it's being used at cooler, closer to lager fermentation temperatures.
Or the opposite, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
So it's really,
or vice versa.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like it's really more of a description of the approach that maybe they're, I don't know, recommending one takes when they use that yeast. Yeah. So, okay. I've always been curious about that. I know that there are certain blends out there.
Well, I think part of that is, most of these strains, if you're looking at, a German ale or like cable car, steam beer strains, you've selected that strain to do the same thing in those conditions over and over and over and over and over again for, 50 or 100 years. And that, what you end up with is, that strain is pretty dialed into running at a specific temperature. That, whatever ended up living is things that are efficient at working, if it's an ale strain working at a colder temperature or a lager strain working at a higher temperature for those kind of strains. It's just what has been selected for over the years.
Right. And it's kind of learned to do what it does well at those temperatures or whatever. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Well, we've done a bunch of experiments on yeast-related variables ranging from pitch rate to fermentation temperature, the results of which have been quite surprising. When we get back from this short break, we're going to be going over some of the rules, quote-unquote rules, related to yeast as well as Imperial's thoughts on our findings. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
So a couple weeks ago, we dropped an episode of the Brewlosophy podcast where we discussed some experiments we've done that produced results that sort of fly in the face of the conventional wisdom. And I'm really curious what your guys' expert opinions are on this. Just a quick overview. We had one of our contributors a while back compare a beer fermented with a single pack of yeast, it was a vial of yeast back then, to an adequately sized starter. He served it to 20 participants and only 9 were able to identify the unique sample. Not significant at all. And the tasters noted no off flavors in either of those beers. That kind of inspired him to do a experiment looking at the impact of over pitching. So he made a cool fermented lager, pitched one with a pack of dry yeast and the other one with 5 packs of dry yeast. Now, I'm not totally certain on what to expect from an overpitched beer, but 5 out of 15 participants got it right, which is exactly 1/3, kind of what you'd expect by random chance. And again, no off flavors were noted. And so then the most recent experiment that we did was Matt Del Fiacco. He actually used Darkness, an Imperial strain, for an Imperial Stout that was 1108, so 1.108 OG. He pitched 1 can of Darkness into one batch, and then he built up a starter to 450 billion cells that he pitched into the other batch. Similar to the other ones, only 10 out of 22 people were able to identify the unique sample in that experiment. He needed 12 in order to reach significance, so it wasn't significant. And not a single person noted any off flavors. Matt said both beers tasted the same to him and were really good. So I'm not sure what's going on. These were all fresh packs of yeast. I don't know if that played a role, but I wonder what you guys think about these findings.
Yeah, I think these type of similarities when using different pitch rates have a lot to do with what strain you're using and what that base beer is. I'm excited to hear that 1 can of Darkness finished out a big beer like that, as compared to using a little bit higher pitch rate. So
yeah,
that's good to see. But when you're talking differences and similarities, big Imperial Stout is going to cover up a lot of yeast aromatics and contributions of flavor. So I think the nature of the tests kind of have to be dialed in differently to see some differences sometimes.
And you mentioned that the specific strain perhaps is going to be more or less sensitive to pitch rate, maybe over other strains.
Exactly. As an example, our Stefan, the German Hefeweizen yeast, if you alter the pitch rate significantly from, let's say, 6 million to 12 million to 24 million cells per mil, it's really going to influence the aromatics on that beer, taking it from low pitch rates, lots of banana, to high pitch rates, no, or really low ester profile.
Huh. That's fascinating, and I just added that to the list of future experiments. That's another one with saison strains. I know people who intentionally underpitch when they're making a saison that they want to have a lot of that, quote unquote farmhouse character, because under the impression that by underpitching that you're stressing those yeast to the point where they're going to produce a stronger ester and phenol profile.
Yeah, I would say it may not only be stress, but just the fact that when you're pitching low pitch rates, you have a higher level of growth. And typically when that's occurring, you're getting higher ester profiles.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it's not necessarily yeast stress that forces them to produce these flavors.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's good to know. I've always thought it was a yeast stress issue. So, but it's the fact of their reproduction and that's what kind of encourages the expression of these certain esters.
Yeah, it's just the dynamics of the population growth and how that's working.
Huh. So in many ways, we can on the homebrew scale, at the very least, we can kind of show based on our experiences with these multiple experiments that pitch rate may not necessarily, a low pitch rate may not necessarily guarantee that your beer is going to be shit, but by building up the right size starter and pitching an adequate amount of yeast, I would imagine there's at least some insurance in doing that.
Yeah. I got this question a lot. My job used to be to travel around the country and drink beer and help people with fermentation. It was pretty rad.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
At the same time, you hear people on, hey, I always overpitch, I always underpitch to bring this out or that out. You do run the risk with, and there are, like Jess said, there are some ways that some strains that are you can tell immediately on, hey, that pitch rate, anybody, 100% of your trial should be able, if you do the test with Zafon, and you set the test up to show off the different pitch rates, there are some strains that 100% will be able to tell. There's some strains that, are not significant.
Yeah.
You won't be able, at the same time, when you brew beer, I try to brew good beer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to understand what I'm putting in my beer and understand why I'm putting in my beer. You know, doubling your grain profile or doubling your hop profile is going to result in significantly different beers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeast, sometimes you can get away with it. Sometimes you can't get away with it. But at the same time, what you're trying to do is make the best beer every time. And I think to do that, you really want to understand what you're putting in your beer and why.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a reason, you know, we just released this episode a couple weeks ago, and you know, both Matt and I said, or Jake and I said, you know, we're still propping up our yeast and starters, and even just to wake them up, you know, get them going. And a part of it for me is consistency. You know, I want to know that you know, what I did last time is, you know, I can repeat that there's replicability between batches that I make. So if I make a beer that's really great, you know, one time, and I want to make it again 4 months later, you know, I want it to have the same quality. And to me, there's an element of consistency that goes into that kind of drives why I continue to make yeast starters.
Yeah. You know, doing the same thing all the time is great as long as you're not making the same mistake all the time.
Right.
So you know, we're big fans of process, and we don't do process changes without a lot of thought.
Right.
And understanding of what are we not thinking of that's going to be a giant pain in the ass, you know, 3 weeks from now.
Yep.
So doing the same thing is great. Getting the same amount of yeast is really important. You know, a lot of commercial people switch over to us based on our larger pitch rate, and that they get very consistent fermentation and tank residency times. You know, when you're trying to run a business, an extra week in stainless costs a ton of money.
Right.
And so getting consistent pitch rates, there's some monetary benefits as well. When you look at a commercial scale.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. Yeah. And that leads me to a question about, you know, you think about stuck fermentations. Is there a relationship between underpitching a beer, or maybe even overpitching a beer, and this propensity for yeast to kind of just putter out and stop working?
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation. That's kind of our big thing here, why we even came on the scene and package as much yeast as we do. We're trying to help brewers avoid that situation. So usually if you have a stuck fermentation or incomplete fermentation, it has something to do with your pitch rates being too low. It could also be your dissolved oxygen levels in your wort are too low at the beginning. But typically the conversation that comes up when somebody has a stuck fermentation is, how much yeast did you pitch? And that usually gives the answer.
Yeah, I had a good buddy who was having a stuck fermentation issue with every batch of beer. I think he made 6-7 batches of beer, and then you know, we went through all of the typical culprits, and then we found out that his thermometer was just broken, and he was mashing everything at like 180. So
that's a problem.
Yeah, it wasn't yeast after all. So
you know, we troubleshoot, you know, probably 10 of these a day.
Wow.
Maybe not that many, but it's a large proportion of Jess's time and my time is troubleshooting and running a forced ferment test on each batch. That would have solved your buddy's problem. And it's good practice to do, is just understanding what that specific wort is fermentable down to.
Yeah, right.
So then you can tell if it's a hot side, like a broken thermometer, or a cold side is under pitching. That's a pretty easy test to run there.
Yeah, I know. I do forced ferment tests quite often, probably every other batch, just out of interest. It's kind of my own private thing. Well, the experiments that I've personally found most interesting and most shocking have to do with fermentation temperature. You know, I'm pitching adequate cell counts into every batch. That's something that I'm kind of sold on, despite the findings of these experiments. But fermentation temperature is one that I've always expected to be incredibly important. In fact, if you were to ask, you know, a group of home brewers or professional brewers, what's one of the most important components of, you know, making good beer, I think fermentation temperature along with pitch rate would top the top too, it's why we all buy chest freezers and these different ways of controlling the fermentation temperature. So we've done, again, I'm going to go over these really quickly. We've done a few experiments with ales, one of which looked at the fuller strain fermented at 66 or 19 degrees C versus 76 or 24 degrees C. 12 out of 22 people got that right, which put it into the significant zone. So we could say that they were reliably distinguishable. The crazy thing to me, I brewed this beer, is that the warm fermented beer was actually noticeably cleaner than the one fermented at 66F. So the one fermented 10 degrees warmer at 76 or 24 degrees Celsius for our international listeners, was cleaner and drier, and it didn't have any of that like punch you in the face fruity esters.
What was your pitch rate?
That I expect. Okay, on that one, goodness gracious, make me look this up. I know that I built up a starter. It was I believe the beer was a mild. So it wasn't a super high pitch rate, but I definitely built it up to whatever the calculator told me it had to be. So probably 160 billion cells altogether, something like that, 200 billion cells.
That sounds reasonable. That's interesting. I've used that strain quite a bit and typically never crank it up that high, so I can't comment a lot to running that strain at high temps, but I know on the lower end of things, you can really influence the cleanliness of that strain by running it around 64 versus 68 to 70.
So the lower fermentation temperature for a strain like that might actually end up pushing out more character, not necessarily a good or a bad way, but kind of more noticeable characteristics from it.
Yeah, the temperature I think is pretty important with that strain, but I think with a lot of yeast strains, especially ales, that the range we can use them are way broader than they're typically used. But back to that experiment, we might think, I think it'd be interesting to analyze that fermentation day to day to see what's happening with that beer, because it might be a situation where I guess what you would maybe refer to as secondary aging, or what happens to that beer after you hit terminal.
Right.
Things are happening at a different rate because of that temperature that you're using.
Right.
You might be cleaning up certain compounds faster.
Yeah.
And the subsequent beers, if you package them at the same day, the lower fermentation beer might still have some of those compounds that are flavor active.
That maybe just require more aging
levels.
out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And I would also look at your pitch rate in conjunction with your temperature. I don't think you can look at those separately.
Sure.
And, if you are under pitching or over pitching, that's going to play a role in it as well.
Yeah. Well, and both were one of the things, with these experiments is we pitch both beers. And when we get to talking about our lager fermentation temp experiments, it's the same with those. We pitch both at the same pitch rate. And so that, if it's producing, a significant finding like this one did, and we did another one comparing the popular Hefeweizen strain. I think it was the Stefan variant. I forget exactly which one was used in that, but at 60F versus 70F, that's 16C versus 22C. And indeed, 19 out of 32 people got it right. So they were able to reliably distinguish that one. That was a significant finding. And according to Malcolm, the cool fermented one actually had less esters and a higher kind of clove phenolic character than the one that was fermented warm. So
yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what you'd expect, right? Like that's what I've always heard, that pitch cool if you want more phenols, pitch warm if you want more banana.
Yeah, I think that is a general rule of thumb. But I think something interesting to experiment with would be if you're running these big ranges in fermentation temp, would be to, let's say, take the high temperature fermentation and age it for a shorter amount of time than the cold fermentation and see how that affects the final product.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot, actually, that the warmer, I forget what the principle is, but that the warmer something gets, the quicker things happen to it. Mm-hmm. And I could see how it would kind of push along the aging characteristics of a beer sitting at 10 degrees warmer than another sample.
Yeah, a rough rule of thumb is every 10 degrees Celsius it doubles in speed, right, Jess?
Right.
Yep.
And we did it with Loki here. Matt, one of the guys that works here, he ran kind of a similar test, same pitch rate with Loki, which is a Norwegian farmhouse strain.
Mm-hmm.
And he ran it really warm, fairly warm, and then kind of a standard ale fermentation temp. And he was able to get there's a very specific kind of peach ester from that strain, which we've never found anywhere else.
Huh.
That only pops out at a certain temperature. Above that, that strain can take being really warm, but it was clean with a little fusel. And colder was clean, but there's, he ran his, kind of the middle Goldilocks one he got a peach ester off. So looking at, trying to figure out what flavor you want from each strain and what temperature you need to run to get that flavor at what pitch rate is, that's some really interesting stuff.
Definitely. When you said peach ester, it made me think of I've heard from people who ferment the strain like Flagship Too Cool, and they say they get a peach ester off of that. I've never gone lower than about 65 degrees with that particular strain and have never noticed a peach ester, but we've got an experiment lined up to, we've done so many lager fermentations, really warm, but we haven't done any ale strains fermented really cool. So we're going to start touching on that a little bit just to see what kind of characteristics we get out of that. Speaking of the lager fermentation temperature ones, this is where things get a little more interesting, in my opinion. It seems like home brewers and even some smaller craft brewers avoid making lager beer because of the time such cool fermentation requires, plus the whole lagering step. Well, what initially started sort of as an attempt on my part to prove how important fermentation temperature is for making lagers, we've now performed a series of experiments that have led to some really confounding results to me. Many of which have been on what is your guys' L13 global strain. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's the Weihenstephaner strain.
That's right.
And so we've also used, a couple of times, we've used the Pilsner Urquell strain or your guys' Urkel. We've done, with these two strains, I'm not going to go into too much detail. We don't have time for that. We've done 5 experiments in total. The only one that returned a significant result compared lagers fermented with the Weihenstephan strain at 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 C versus 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 C. So it was a really extreme comparison on this one. No one's going to ferment a lager at 82 degrees intentionally, I don't think. But the interesting thing about that one was that the taster feedback, so it came back significant. So those who were able to identify the unique sample in the triangle test were then surveyed about, their thoughts about the beer, still not knowing what was going on. And almost all of them identified the higher ferment beer, the one that was fermented warm, as being the lager, as being more lager-like, the one that they thought was fermented cool. I mean, that just blew my mind.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think out of any strain, that one will be the most forgiving at high temperatures. It's one that I commonly recommend if people just can't hit lower fermentation temps and they want to do a lager.
Yeah.
I think it might go back again to the process, what temperature that beer is held at for secondary or just aging after terminal, and how quickly certain things clean up.
Yeah, that's a good thought. We've used the what ultimately is your guys' Urkel strain twice now for experiments, and both of those came back not significant as well. I've used both just in my own private brewing, fermented at 67, 68 degrees, and I'm pumping out these beers that taste, I consider myself decently acquainted with lager beer, and they taste great. And I know that there's an element of most hobbies that, tradition matters, and doing it the way that, our forefathers did it is a big deal. But there's something about the idea of being able to turn, a delicious Pilsner or Vienna lager around in the time it takes to make an ale that seems really appealing to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's obviously people doing traditional fermentations on lagers and aging that takes forever, for weeks or even into the months. But I'm guessing there's a lot of mainstream lagers out there that are shorter beers than what we typically would think of them as being.
Yeah, no, I agree. We did find a significant result, and this is kind of takes me back to that whole Froberg versus Saaz variant thing. Jake did an experiment where he used I think it's a strain, the Grupo Modelo strain, and he compared 50 Fahrenheit or 10C versus 66 Fahrenheit 19C, and people were able to tell those ones apart to a significant degree. So it kind of brings back that idea that maybe there's just some strains that are a little more robust and less sensitive to those temperature variations, whereas other ones maybe are a little bit more sensitive to that.
Yeah. There are, some lager strains are cleaner at higher temperatures or can handle it, and some will start to show some signs of stress or non-desirable characteristics.
Yeah. It's interesting because in that one, I think the majority of tasters, almost all of them actually, ended up preferring the cool fermented, Vienna lager over the warm fermented one.
Okay, and just can I throw out one thing that I would not recommend people doing lagers at 82 degrees?
Either do I.
Okay, great. As long as we get that clear, so I'm not 4 weeks from now.
Yeah, exactly. Science comes not without, we're not here recommending people do what we do. We do it for fun and to explore this stuff. But I would never recommend somebody ferment their lager or any beer for that matter, other than a saison maybe at 82 degrees. So.
Yeah. Just wanted to get that one out there.
Nope, I'm
save
right
us
there with
some
you.
stress in the future.
Yeah, right. That your email inbox just blew up. Well, the yeast fermentation temperature thing is fascinating to me. We certainly plan to continue exploring that one. And it does seem like, like we were talking about, that there are strain dependencies when it comes to sensitivity to fermentation temperature. All right. I got a couple just kind of general questions for you guys, some stuff that we came up with as the Brewlosophy crew over here. One of them is, what are your thoughts on homebrewers harvesting yeast and the different methods for doing that?
As a yeast supplier, I want them to not do that ever.
You hear that, listeners? Stop harvesting yeast.
But practically speaking, I think it's not an issue. And if people can do it in a clean manner and repitch that yeast fairly quickly, that it's a great practice. So a couple of the key things when harvesting and repitching is just to make sure when you're harvesting that your containers are obviously clean and sanitized or sterilized, but then also that you're storing that yeast immediately after harvest in the refrigerator and using it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And then the key also is when you're going to repitch, that you're not dumping a quart of yeast into 5 gallons. You actually want to quantify or measure that yeast a little bit and repitch accordingly, so you're not pitching a crazy amount of yeast into your wort.
Yeah. I've got experience with overbuilding yeast starters and harvesting off of that. It's not something I'm doing too much these days, but I know it's a pretty commonly used method nowadays.
Yeast is expensive. It's a big proportion of any brew, and on a commercial scale, we never recommend people buy a single pitch for a single beer. You want to plan out 2 or 3 beers around it, and I think that's perfect. That's how it should be used. It divides. You can reuse it again and again. So planning those beers out, just making sure that you're sanitary, making sure that you're safe and you're not storing it. A lot of people use mason jars or glass. And yeast will hold a lot of CO2 and slurry. You don't want a closed container of yeast that sits in the back of the fridge for a couple months.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah, using it clean and then making sure that you're not building pressure on that vessel is nice as well.
Yeah, for the sake of safety, really. I mean, that's You want an exploding yeast jar in your fridge. Matt Del Fiacco, one of our contributors, he had a question. Based on sales trends, what are some of the most popular styles brewers are making currently, and how have things in that respect changed over the last few years?
Northeast IPAs.
All the way, huh? I knew it.
I've done this, I don't know, probably closing in on a decade, and Jess is probably closing in on 2. And if you told me 5 years ago, I would get yelled at because my yeast flocks out of suspension. I would, that'd be crazy. I wouldn't believe you. So, we actually Juice is our number one seller. It passed flagship last year.
Wow.
Which I never thought anything would pass flagship just based on sales data over the, that's what everybody used. And,
Right.
It's a nice strain. It's very clean. You can't really mess it up. Honestly, using flagship in your temperature studies, that thing can take really warm and it can take really cold, and it's still fairly clean. That's why people use it.
Right.
Or one of the reasons. But just watching people start to try to accentuate hop character with ester profiles that's awesome to see. And I like that some of those strains are coming out, and that's what we're trying to chase right now is more strains that can complement newer hop flavors.
So awesome. I used Juice a couple years ago for a British golden ale that was one of the brightest beers I've ever made. So that was sort of one of the things that inspired my questioning of what exactly it is in New England IPA that's maintaining that haze. I don't think it's just a yeast thing, but obviously that plays a role.
It is not a yeast thing. That strain flocks out fairly well.
Yeah.
The Northeast IPA is all protein and hop haze. It's almost no yeast haze.
That's been my thought. Yeah, polyphenol, and protein haze. That's so interesting that passed up flagship. I would never have guessed that, by the way. I mean, that's news to me. What do you see as being besides New England IPA? What do you see as being like a growing trend, maybe in 2018? What styles are getting more and more popular?
We're growing a lot of lager yeast right now, which is nice. I drink and brew a lot of lagers myself. It's my favorite style of beer.
Amen.
I see, L's on our big tanks a lot. Our tank sizes range from half a barrel to 20 barrels. And, half a barrel is a barrel when we're trying to get a 10 barrel pitch of a custom strain out. A 20 barrel is something that a lot of people are wanting that week. So we see a lot of L's up there, which, I honestly, I don't think if you look back at all the different trends in beer it's all IPAs or variants on it, San Diego IPA, Northwest IPA, CDA, Northeast IPA, people like hops. That's the constant in beer trends is people want hops. So I would love it if, everybody switched over and started making awesome Pilsners.
You and me both, my friend.
I really think it's going to be, the next trend that comes out is going to be hop focused, and it's going to be, I have no idea what it's going to be, but we're going to try to, what we're hoping to do is find more strains that accentuate hop character
with ester profile.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. That's so cool. Well, any new Imperial strains planned for release soon?
I think, Loki, I think we're deciding whether to call it Loki or Peach. That's going to come out in spring. We are testing another strain that the morphology of the strain looks very similar to Juice. So we'll test that. We have it out at a couple commercial breweries right now and doing some internal stuff.
Very cool.
So that could be another IPA strain. And then that's, I don't know, we're trying to get, I think Jess is leading that project, so he'd probably know a little more on it.
Yeah, we're just working on some different strains that would fit that future IPA profile. Yeah. So we're messing with different strains and using different hops with them. And then, I hope to come out with just some funky stuff down the road, even though sour beers aren't like huge volume for us. It's still growing like crazy.
Yeah.
Compared to a few years ago. So
definitely
just doing some different interesting stuff to keep the geeks going. And make
The
sure
Milk the
everybody's
Funk group,
fun.
I'm sure, appreciates the geek moniker.
Oh yeah.
Well, I was just talking with one of my contributors about a experiment that we've got planned using Sour Patch Kids. So something new for us. Yeah, I'm stoked to get our hands on that and to check some stuff out. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, guys. Super interesting stuff. I'm stoked to hang out with you guys in Portland in June at HomebrewCon.
Yeah, us too, man. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be so fun.
Yeah, you coming out early?
Yeah, I'll be out there early. I'm planning on being there. Well, probably Wednesday morning. So it's the 27th, I believe. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we've been chatting with the folks from Yakima Valley Hops and Mecca Great Estate Malt, along with you guys, about maybe even doing something a little early that evening. So yeah,
it's going to be fun. It's going to. CBC was here a couple years ago. That was great. I'm stoked that the homebrew community gets to come in Portland, and stoked to show off the lab and
hell yeah,
have some fun. And my wife's not going to be really stoked with me showing up drunk afterwards. That's one nice thing about having it a long ways away, is I can stumble back to the hotel. But
you said it.
I'll probably get a hotel. Be smart about the thing.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate what you guys are doing for brewing in general, and especially for homebrewers. You can head over to imperialyeast.com to check out what Imperial is up to. And you can find more on the experiments discussed in this episode at brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Attention Baker shoppers. This flu season, why make an extra stop when a world of care is right in store? Get your free flu vaccine from a licensed pharmacist at our award-winning pharmacy. Let our family protect your family with a free flu shot. It's all here. Bakers, a world of care is in store. Flu vaccines are covered by most insurance plans and are free to the recipient. Check with your plan. Services and availability vary by location. Age and other restrictions may apply. Visit the pharmacy or site for details.